Well, let's get the important bit out first, and it is the most important because he won the race. Lando Norris won the Brazilian Grand Prix, and the way he won the sprint race, just superb in every aspect. Got the best from, dare I say it, the best car, the McLaren-Mercedes, and won this Grand Prix in style on a fabulous circuit. Beautiful piece of driving all day, and this despite McLaren having to rethink their tyre strategy as a result of the hard tyre not coming into play as much as everybody had anticipated, including Pirelli, who predicted before the race that if you start on medium tyres, the sort of conservative but right way to do it if you're McLaren, Lando Norris in particular, you run a one-stop strategy and you go medium to hard. We'll get onto that in a minute, but I just wanted to say, before it gets swamped by everything else that happened, that Lando Norris won this Grand Prix in style, and congratulations to him. Another major step towards becoming world champion this year. Now, onto the real part of the Brazilian Grand Prix, which of course was centered around Max Verstappen starting this race from the pit lane. He did so because Red Bull, after Max had qualified only P16 and had not made it out of Q1 in qualifying yesterday on Saturday, they took the decision to change the power unit in the engine and all the ancillaries that come with it, because at least it would give them a fresh power unit for these remaining 4 races. And had they not done it at any stage, if they were going to do that, they would have got a 10-place grid penalty. So why not do that when you're P16 and then you start from the pit lane? There's not much downside in doing it. And indeed, there's potential upside because maybe you missed the first corner accident. Anyway, amongst all the midfield stuff there. So Max in the pit lane, and you're sensing already that Max might do something special, because Max Verstappen in the pit lane means that there's a target out there. And he's like a bull, isn't he? He's like a dog. He's like a hungry dog with the raw meat hanging. And that's the front of the race. And here's the pit lane. Let's go. And that was Max Verstappen's day, really. Just absolutely superb. But of course, there were other factors that came into play in Max's amazing drive from the pit lane to P3. And the first of those was, well, really it was the Pirelli strategy, which threw everybody, because the hard tyre, quite clearly early on in the race with some of the other cars that were running it, was not a great race tyre. So quite early on, McLaren, Charles Leclerc had made a pretty good start initially in the Ferrari. He started on mediums as well. Had to think, well, if we're not going to the hard, that means we've got to run the soft at some point, and this is going to make it, what, medium, soft, or how are we going to do that, medium, soft, medium? And all of a sudden it became a complicated race in terms of tyre strategy. But guess who didn't have a complicated race in terms of tyre strategy? Max Verstappen, because he started from the pit lane, and logically he was on the hard tyre, because Red Bull were thinking, well, just run as long a stint as we can, half the race if we can, gain lots of track position, and then put him on a new set of mediums for the second half of the race. But Max got a puncture from debris that resulted from a first corner fracas involving basically Lewis Hamilton and Carlos Sainz, and resulted in Lewis also getting a puncture and having to come in, and damage to the floor for Lewis, which eventually led to his retirement. Safety car came out because of the amount of debris. And then it changed again, because there was yet another first corner incident. On this occasion, it involved Oscar Piastri coming down the inside, left front locked, Kimi Antonelli to his right, who he hit, and then Kimi Antonelli taking out Charles Leclerc, who was out of the race immediately. Great shame for Charles, great shame for Ferrari fans. I mean, Lewis nowhere and eventually retired, and Charles out at the restart. So, yeah, a terrible day for Ferrari. But I just want to talk a little bit about that incident, because, in my opinion, Oscar Piastri was very hard done by when he was given a 10-second penalty for that. And I don't say that because of what we saw on the replays and what the stewards were looking at, which was Oscar just going down the inside, locking up and bouncing into Kimi Antonelli. I say that because, for me, that incident began on the run up the hill out of turn 12 before Lando Norris has effectively restarted the race by flooring the throttle and disappearing down the start-finish line. Because what happened then was that Kimi Antonelli unaccountably was much slower than everybody around him. And I think it was because, amazingly, he was in third gear and everybody else is in second. There's a massive speed differential, much more than you'd ever get with the effect of, say, for example, DRS. So let's have a look at the speeds then, as Lando restarts the race. Lando restarts the race, just starting to floor the throttle at 111 kilometers an hour. Behind him, Kimi Antonelli, at that moment, is only doing 102 kilometres an hour. That's 9 kilometres an hour difference. Behind him, Charles Leclerc 107, that's okay. Behind him, Oscar Piastri 111, exactly the same speed as Lando Norris. And behind him, Isack Hadjar 116. And guess what? All those guys are in second gear, except for one, Kimi Antonelli, who's in third gear. And now let's look at the difference in speeds when Lando's now flat on the throttle and starting to accelerate down that straight. Lando Norris 141, Kimi Antonelli 117 at exactly the same moment. Charles Leclerc 124, Oscar Piastri 125, Isack Hadjar 124. Again, they're all still in second gear, except for Kimi Antonelli, who's in third gear. So there's a massive speed differential there, and I'm wondering whether, if you do that, if there's any sort of regulation controlling that. There probably isn't, because no action was taken, but I wonder whether they're even looking at that. There was a huge speed differential as they accelerated down that pit straight towards turn one. And if you think about it, Oscar Piastri had the option of either staying behind Kimi Antonelli and backing off, because he was going 9 kilometres an hour quicker, or going to the left where there was room between Antonelli and the pit wall, which is what he did. He went down the left. But there was dirt and dust and stuff down the left there. The tyres weren't fully hot, and when he hit the brakes, he locked up. But it was all because of the speed differential thing, which I've never seen before at a restart like that. I don't know what Kimi Antonelli was doing. Third gear when everybody else was in second. And just in case you think it's a Mercedes thing, guess what gear George Russell was in? Second gear. Anyway, I don't think because of that, Oscar should have got the penalty. I think Kimi Antonelli should have felt that he had made a bad job of the restart and he was going to get swamped. And all he needed to do was just stay in the middle of the track, because somebody like Piastri was bound to be, or maybe Hadjar was bound to be on his left. For sure, Charles Leclerc was going to be on his right. One thing was clear. If he was going to come down for his apex into turn one, there was going to be a shunt, and there was. So, I wonder whether the stewards talked about any of that. I very much doubt it. Anyway, as a result of all that, there was another virtual safety car. And at this moment, they brought Max Verstappen in. Red Bull brought Max Verstappen in to take him off the hard tyre and put him onto the mediums. You thought, wow, that's an interesting strategy call. But in reality, it was nothing of the kind. It was because the sensors had shown up a puncture on the right front of Max's car. And so they brought him in and put him on a new set of mediums. And that was, as it turned out, the best thing that could have happened, because it wasn't long after the race had then restarted correctly and properly without any more incident, that it became clear that the hard tyre, which others were still on at that point of the race, was not a very good tyre and wasn't going to stand up well and wasn't going to be quick. So all of a sudden, teams like McLaren, Ferrari were out of it now, but they would have been in the same situation. But certainly let's look at McLaren, starting on the medium tyre, planning a one-stop strategy to go to the hard, suddenly had to rethink all their strategy of where we were going to go. And all of a sudden, Max Verstappen, he's basically got a free pit stop in VSC conditions to get onto the medium. He's started on the hard, has no more compound regulation change to have to make. He can just look forward to a race of 2 sets of mediums. And that was a big step forward for him, because the medium was very consistent throughout the race on that Red Bull, and it was for everybody else. It went off like the soft tyre went off, but it took much longer to go off. And I think it underlined what I was suggesting yesterday, not as a Monday morning quarterback, but as somebody that wondered why they didn't try that. And that was that if they'd gone out in Q1 yesterday on the medium tyre with no intention of stopping at all, just keeping Max out there for the 8 or 10 minutes, whatever it is, just to get a time to get him into Q2 and then start playing around with the soft. If they'd done that, he probably would have made it into Q2. I think the Red Bull looked really good on the medium, terrible on the hard. I think that was one of the reasons a lot of people did stay away from the hard, because Max quite early on said this medium is so much better than the hard tyre in the conditions in which we had today, and the wind was getting up a little bit as well. That medium on the Red Bull was just the perfect tyre. Anyway, Max is now on the medium tyre, a new medium tyre as well, and he's got another new set in the garage as well, which is a bit of a worry for everybody else. And he starts to side through the field. As everybody else's tyres start to go off, Max just picks up places. And eventually he's up there looking at P4, P3, and then P2 potentially, because McLaren go from medium to soft. And of course, they know that soft isn't going to get them to the end of the race. And they're thinking, what are we going to do here? Go back to medium again? Are we going to try and make the soft last as long as we can? Verstappen's looking really good on 2 sets of mediums effectively. 2 new sets of mediums. And all of a sudden, this pressure from Red Bull and Max, which had kind of just happened organically, it wasn't real planning, put pressure on everyone. to run a race right at the limit of what they could do on strategy. It certainly pushed the Mercedes as hard as they could go in terms of strategy. And with Oscar Piastri then subsequently incurring a 10-second penalty from the stewards for that first corner incident, the first turn one incident, all of a sudden he was out of the game so far as Max was concerned. His job in beating George Russell was made easier by George having quite high brake temperatures and having to nurse the brakes, which was not a great thing if the pass is going to be made under braking into turn one, as it was indeed in the late stages of the race by Max on George with DRS, which meant then Kimi Antonelli. And about 30 laps before that, when Max was still on the medium tyre, Red Bull had said to him, you're doing well here, you're only 6 seconds behind George Russell. And classic Max, his reply was, yeah, but how far in front of Russell is Antonelli? It's like, I don't want to know about George, I'm going to beat him. I need to know how I can get to P2. Classic Max. And he was on the medium tyre, looking pretty good. But the tyres were starting to go away. And there was a moment when GP got on the radio and he was talking about George Russell was going to probably have to come in for tyres again, and his mediums were going to go off because they were old mediums, as distinct from Max's, who were new mediums. And Max said, I don't want to hear about George, just tell me what I'm supposed to do. I'm losing grip rapidly. And I think at that moment, Red Bull knew that they had to flip a coin and go for it. And to their credit, they put a set of softs on Max's car right at the end. Now, I've just been saying the soft tyre was the lesser of two evils. It was the soft or the hard. But the soft, of course, is a different tyre when it's on a relatively light fuel Red Bull towards the end of the race on a pretty green track, admittedly with debris offline, but a pretty green track now with a reasonable grip level, light car. And all of a sudden, the soft tyre was magic on the Red Bull of Max Verstappen. He again sighed through the field, quickly caught and passed George Russell. And the last 4 or 5 laps, he closed on Kimi Antonelli for P2. But it was never going to be easy because Max's tyres did start to go away over the last couple of laps. And 2 laps to go, he had a bit of a jink coming out of 12, lost the rear a little bit. And you knew then the soft tyre was right on the edge. Mind you, Kimi's mediums are on the edge as well. He was in free air. That was the one thing that was his advantage. And he defended beautifully and finished second in the end from Max Verstappen. But I still maintain Kimi was lucky not to get some sort of penalty for what happened at the restart there, which effectively obliged Piastri to go where he was. Anyway, I won't say any more about that because he didn't get a penalty. And I don't want to detract from his achievement as well and how well he drove and how good he looked alongside George when they were relatively near. Again, beautiful early turn in to most of the corners. That lovely long right-hander in the infield there behind the pits. Antonelli just superb through there as well. But I've got to say, when Max was near Antonelli, I've been saying how good Antonelli is on slow corners and his short corners, and really good feel. But when Max was near him, he almost made Antonelli look like Carlos Sainz. It was unbelievable how much earlier Max was getting into the corners and how he was manipulating the car into the apex, even into the rotation point, even when he was starting to lose grip. Even more so in comparison with George Russell. I mean, George looked really wide compared with Max Verstappen. We often see George in isolation. You think, wow, this guy's really good. And he is good. Of course he's good. But Max, just another class, really, compared to both of those two guys in terms of what he was able to do with the car on the entry to the corner, which, of course, is the critical part. He was just amazing there, I thought. And then as for Oscar Piastri, he finished only 4th with that 10-second penalty, probably had some damage on the car as well. He didn't even get George Russell, albeit with George having that brake problem. So that was not a good day again for Oscar Piastri in a McLaren, in a car that was that good. But again, let's not lose sight of the great job today that Lando Norris did. So it was Lando from Kimi Antonelli, from Max Verstappen, incredibly, from George Russell, Oscar Piastri, and Oliver Behrman, an absolutely superb P6, fighting all the way, drove beautifully. And like Antonelli, started on the soft tyre, which meant that he didn't have to wonder about choice. It was pretty clear, go to the medium and then another set of mediums. But he had to do it under race conditions. That's the thing from Max, who did it behind the VSC. So yeah, beautiful drive by Oliver Behrman. Interesting to see the difference between the two racing bulls. Liam Lawson ran the one-stop soft to medium strategy that Pirelli said was the fastest way to win the Brazilian Grand Prix. I don't think McLaren did that because it's better for them to start on medium. They've got such a good car, Lando on the pole, etc. But from where Liam Lawson was, very good choice to do that. Interestingly, Isaac Hadjar ran a different strategy. Started on the soft, but then made 2 stops and ran 2 sets of mediums and got beaten by Liam Lawson. So, yeah, Pirelli were right about that certainly that one-stop strategy was the right way to win the race. But it was all thrown by the hard not coming into play for teams like McLaren, and that was the real spanner in the works in terms of changing things around at the last minute. Nico Hülkenberg was in the points again. He loves Brazil, goes so well there. He's in the points for Sauber Ferrari, and P10 Pierre Gasly, who drove so well last year and drove really well again this year to get a point for Alpine Renault. Finally, a point for that team. A very good job from Pierre. So the race as a whole will be remembered obviously for Lando's win, but it will be, I think it'll go down in history as one of the great drives by Max Verstappen. And the immortal words of GP, his race engineer, saying, "You are now the race leader on lap 51." Of course, this is when Lando came in for his second set of medium tyres. And that's what prompted, in the closing stages, Red Bull, when Max said those tyres are going off, to flip the coin and say, right, we'll put a set of softs on and we'll see what we can do. There's nothing to lose, as Max said, let's go for it. And the softs nearly made it through, but they went off about 2 laps from the end and it's unable to get Kimi, but he still got P3, an amazing performance. So there we are, an excellent Brazilian Grand Prix. The only thing it didn't have, as I say, is rain, and had it rained, who knows what would have happened. I'm sure it would have been an even better result for Max Verstappen, but it didn't. The weather gods were shining on Lando Norris's side today and yesterday as well, because the predictions had been for violent storms, violent rain, and it all held away. And Lando made perfect use of it all. A big thanks to Jetcraft, to OEM Exclusive, to Track Ninja, and to REC Watches. Don't forget to go to the description below this video, where there's details not only of the next amazing DNA watch to be created by REC, which is the watch we spoke about yesterday, the Bullet watch, taking DNA from the actual Ford Mustang used by Steve McQueen in the Bullet movie, but also another one which you'll see on the REC website, which is the Datsun 240Z, raced with prolific success by John Morton in 70-71 in the C production class in America. That sounds like a bit of a mouthful, and you may think, well, what's that all about? But this was the turning point for Japanese motorsport. Apart from what Honda were doing in Formula One, when Datsun started to win all these races in America with the gorgeous 240Z, that's what changed it all for the Japanese motor industry, in effect. So this is a watch that contains DNA from that actual car, a car run by Peter Brock. Not the Peter Brock that was so successful in Australia as a racing driver, but the Peter Brock who worked for Shelby American and designed himself the shape of the beautiful Shelby Daytona Coupe. That was a Peter Brock creation. He worked for Shelby when John Morton was also working for Shelby, and when Peter went off to start his own race team, his pick of the drivers was John Morton, and he was super quick, John, really nice guy, and made it all the way to IndyCar, very quick as a Le Mans driver as well. But 70-71 was his nirvana in that 240Z, and the DNA watch around that also being created. Neither of them yet on sale. They're also at the production stage, but the details, as I say, in the description below this video. So thanks for watching. Amazing Brazilian Grand Prix. A bit of a break now before Vegas. I'll be back with more live streams and chats with Mark Slade and looking back at that stunning drive by Max Verstappen.